Hi there, hello, salut, bonjour. I hope you're doing very well from wherever you're watching at this moment. It gives me great pleasure to connect with you as we cast a lens on the Republic of Cameroon, trying to make sense of what's happening, especially after the presidential elections that took place on October 12th. And as you know, a lot has happened since October 12th, right up to the swearing-in ceremony that took place on the 6th of November, this same 2025. And before we go anywhere, I just want to continue to thank you for your support and encouragement, and also for commenting, for sharing this content within your circles. Please keep doing so. It helps us to grow. And you know we are following our Operation 10,000 subscribers, and you've been doing a fantastic job, and I just want to keep telling you thank you. And for those of you liking, we see your likes. Commenting, if you like the content, always like. 3 things we ask of you when you join. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't, hit the like button if you like the content, and comment and share within your circles, most especially so many more people can connect and join the movement. So today, as always, we're going to take you right off the top with some updates. I know for context, it's good to always remember that we're talking about an election that was highly contested, and there is evidence to show that the incumbent may have not won the election, especially given the fact that all results that were published up until proven otherwise throughout the polling stations, it shows that Cameroonians were chanting Issa Tchiroma Bakary's name, and even their celebration as well as their disdain when they heard that the Constitutional Council proclaimed President Paul Biya as the winner. We saw the protests. So many Cameroonians have lost their lives. United Nations reports suggest that it's about 48 to 50 people. And we all know that these are not the official records within the country, because those numbers, you always need to multiply them. Again, there's little statistics and documentation to show exactly how many Cameroonians have lost their lives because of this election. And we know so many of them have been detained. And that constitutes some of the updates that we're going to bring to you today. And all of this for what? For an election that was supposed to be free, fair, and transparent, organized by an independent body, in this case, Elections Cameroon, ELECAM. However, even the law that puts ELECAM in place has been so controversial and criticized by all political actors across the board. And we also know that even the Constitutional Council, the authority that's supposed to proclaim the results, did not give room for even listening to the petitions. Because yes, surrogates of the CPDM will tell you that Issa Tchiroma Bakary did not put a petition. Of course he didn't, because 2018 was evidence enough when Professor Moise Kamto went there, a legal luminary of his caliber, defended everything tooth and nail, but yet everything was considered by the Constitutional Council as being inadmissible, dismissed, and called irrecevable. So today, here we are. The country is going through a political turmoil. There's so much heat and tension. Voices, raising everywhere, and people are not happy. For the most part, we can tell you, because the evidence on the ground gives us that level of confidence to say that the situation in the country is not the best. And so today we want to slow down the spin and follow the facts. I've got 5 updates that make sense only when you line them up, and I'll give you the facts and then tell you why it matters, because we need to hit the ground running as always. First, numbers with names behind them. A collective of 149 lawyers, known as Collectif Défense Citoyen Cameroon, visited police stations, gendarmerie posts, central prisons across 6 regions between October 27 and November 2nd. And they've published an elaborate document with a brief report that estimates that at least 1,500 people were arrested and detained. 1,500 people were arrested and detained. And this documentation only took place within that period. And as you know, the swearing-in ceremony took place on November 6th, which means it doesn't cover activities after November 3rd up until date. And we've heard that there have been so many illegal and arbitrary arrests taking place. Why? We'll tell you about the municipal elections that's coming up, because word on the ground say the arrests that have been taking place now are strategically, targeting those that are going to run for these elections. And it will really be disturbing when it's verified that the recent arrests that have taken place are mostly of members belonging to either FSNC or MRSA parties, as well as sympathizers of Issa Tchiroma Bakary. Again, opposition leaders have started decrying the fact that it may just be a purge, that first of all, 3 categories of Cameroonians in different regions have been targeted. First, you have the northerners, those who come from the north region. They are just being targeted as being supporters of Issa Tchiroma Bakary. Those that come from the west region are just considered more aligned towards the movement of change that was also championed by someone like Joachim Chamani and Anissa Ekane of the UPC 2025 platform. And then you have the Anglophones, considered from the northwest and southwest region, people that come from the territory that was historically known as former British Southern Cameroons. Again, it's very concerning if it's verified that the recent wave of arrests constitute people of these different communities that I've just mentioned. That will be a big problem. So we do know of these 1,500 detainees. We can break it down according to the regions. This group was able to kind of like document it, showing that in the far north region, you have 78 detainees. In the center and south, they group it to about 300. And in the east, which constitutes Garabulai, Betua, and Baturi, we're talking about 250. And in the littoral alone, 500. And in the west region is about 400, which again constitutes the localities of Bafang, Bana, Banja, and Chang. And in this report, as you can see, they highlight the fact that access was denied for legal representation and family members, and the detainees were in some kind of inhumane conditions and very deplorable. And the most heart-wrenching is the fact that you had minors in this group of people that were arrested, and now they've tested the 4 walls of jail. They've seen how life in prison looks like at that tender age. You know, they say it ranges between 14 and 18 years of age for the majority. They've also launched new missions and even published how they were able to fund this process. So it's not rumor, it's legwork. And therefore, we need to also look at why it matters, because like we've told you before, we give you the facts, but we also tell you why it matters, which is part of our analysis. These are not just isolated arrests. It all looks more like a systemic dragnet, and kids are caught in it. So we look at that from that lens. Because what are minors doing in jail? You know, did they go before a judge? And you've seen the videos. We don't need to keep going back to them because it's hard to watch when you see minors being trampled in the rain, you know, bare-bodied, and being asked to chant le changement, as if it's a mockery. It's very difficult to watch. And that is why when you hear CPDM surrogates try to say, oh, they were addicts, drug addicts, they were manipulated, and you've heard the Minister of Territorial Administration say it over and over, and all these things, none of it has been proven in the court of law, and they're supposed to be considered innocent until proven guilty. But yet you hear surrogates go about imputing all kinds of allegations and confirmations, because these are they no longer say it's allegations, they just confirm to themselves that these youth were burning places. They attribute all kinds of things on them, and it's very hard to watch. And that leads us to our next update, because we talked about Banja. In Banja, as soon as the 48-hour window of Issa Tchiroma Bakary's ultimatum ended, you know, the people there, the Bafang people, you know, they came out to protest the detention of their children and neighbors. And remember, in the West region alone, lawyers estimate roughly 400 arrests. You know, the timing is not random. It was as Tchiroma's 48-hour ultimatum window was closing. And then comes the legal shock. Civilians transferred to Yaoundé to face military courts. Why it matters? When a teenager from Bafang ends up before a military tribunal in Yaoundé, that isn't ordinary justice. It's a shortcut of rights. Legal critics call it what it is: intimidation by jurisdiction. Now, we'll pause for that, but also to mention that we just have fresh news of motorbike riders in the extreme north in an area that has been called Login. We need to verify and find out how that is playing out. And these motorbike riders have taken to the streets saying they are heading over to go liberate their brothers and sisters. And I would assume that majority of those that were arrested are male, I would hope. And if they are not, then it's even more challenging for the girls that were arrested. And as you see in the video, the bike riders seem to be on a mission. We are told they are in their hundreds, and so we'll keep you updated as we find out more. And that is on the front of those that are already protesting. So we do know that some surrogates of the regime and their allies on social media are already posting, making a mockery of Issa Tchiroma Bakary's 48-hour ultimatum and saying making some derogatory remarks, which we're not going to pay attention to. Now, on the third updates, reports say the regime wants to send a delegation to meet Ambazonian leaders in the US. And the response from Ambazonian leadership already comes clear that no secret meetings. They say if the regime is serious, they should start by making an official announcement right there in Yaoundé and name a senior team comprising of folks like the Prime Minister, the Minister of Territorial Administration, the Secretary General at the Presidency, and also name a neutral venue. And that is very telling that they are not mincing words. However, I'm saying that if it turns out to be true that the regime in Yaoundé is trying to broker peace with the Ambazonian leadership at this particular stage of the post-election crisis, my analysis is that this is not an olive branch of peace, but rather a preemptive wedge to block any potential Tchiroma Anglophone leadership alignment, while the North is tense and the ultimatum dominates headlines. Because you would find out later on when we talk about a prominent minister's interview where he mentions Chris Ano. And stay tuned for that as we continue to tell you that in Cameroonian politics, we've seen this regime deploy the same tactics many times. They divide first and then negotiate later. And that leads us to our fourth update, where, as we can show you, Grégoire Owona, a prominent minister in the Yaoundé regime, and also a strong member of the Central Committee of the ruling CPDM party, was granted an interview that was conducted right within the premises of the ministry that he controls. And in that interview, as you will find out, the journalist was probing and asking questions, pertinent questions that relate to the political situation of the country, Issa Tchiroma Bakary, the elections, and so on. When the journalist asked Minister Grégoire Owona what he thinks about the fraud that was conducted by some Elecam officials that were seen and caught on video, where the tapes were published on social media, and he, Minister Grégoire Owona, being somebody that is very active on social media, he asked him the question, what are his thoughts? Because he's trying to say the elections was conducted free and fair, nobody has to complain, the Constitutional Council has already decided, and so on and so forth. Minister Grégoire Owona says those that were caught and shown on all the videos you saw online don't work for Elections Cameroon. That is the spin that he was able to come up with. And when the journalists probed and said, no, we have evidence to prove that these people work for Elections Cameroon, they had the badges, they had the lanyards, and the minister responded in saying that was all manipulation, it was all prefabricated, that those people don't work for Elections Cameroon. And by the way, nobody went to contest at the Constitutional Council to prove otherwise. So you take it up with the Constitutional Council. Again, why does this matter? This is the regime's communication playbook level 101, where they deny the evidence, deflect the blame, and then delegitimize the accuser, and then send citizens to institutions captured by power, institutions that they have the doors to. He's there saying that the journalists should go and meet people who can go debate and argue and show otherwise. Whereas we have the courts, the judiciary, what are they doing? But again, that is the spin. And you should know that Minister Grégoire Owona's outing talking to a private media network, sitting down in an interview within the premises of the ministry, not the state TV, is to tell you that that's politics, not governmental. So it's always important to know when you see a minister talking in the capacity of a member of the CPDM party, just know it's politics. You should take away the casket of the minister and see it like a pure political discourse. It has nothing to do with governance at that point. You should pay particular attention because that is how they maneuver. But also, we'll show you a clip here shortly where you can hear the minister on the topic of Issa Tchiroma Bakary's relationship with Ambazonian leadership. And when the journalists ask him that on his socials, he's often posted that Issa Tchiroma Bakary is friends with terrorists. And then the journalists ask him, why would you say that? He says in reply that no, he never called Issa Tchiroma Bakary friends of terrorists, that it was Issa Tchiroma Bakary who called himself a friend of terrorists. And you know, for context, let's tell you exactly what Issa Tchiroma Bakary said, at least to contrast it with what the minister is saying. He says Issa Tchiroma Bakary himself said he's a friend to Chris Ano, that Chris Ano is his best friend. And Issa Tchiroma Bakary went to the Northwest, as you know, and apologized to the Anglophone community and all those that were there for his role with the Biya regime in oppressing the people from the former British Southern Cameroons. But the minister, all that the minister retained was the fact that Issa Tchiroma Bakary says that Chris Ano is his best friend. And to Minister Grégoire Owona, they have labeled Chris Ano in their government, in the Biya regime, that Chris Ano is a terrorist. And therefore, to Mr. Grégoire Owona, Issa Tchiroma Bakary says Chris Ano is his best friend. And they, in the Yaoundé regime, say Chris Ano is a terrorist. Therefore, Issa Tchiroma Bakary is friends of the terrorists. And the journalist even tries to ask him that in the Northwest and Southwest region, in this current election, the CPDM candidate, incumbent Paul Biya, scored very high numbers, 80-something in the Northwest and 60 or 60-something in the Southwest region. And these are regions that have been paralyzed economically in so many ways, and even socially and politically for the last 9 years. And we do know that Chris Ano is part of the Ambazonian leadership. And the journalist even probes that, what did Chris Ano do for you to call him a terrorist? And he says he took arms against the Biya regime and the government. And the journalist couldn't even give a follow-up question anymore because he was bent on that line of thought. And to him, he's saying, well, he hopes that they can come back to their senses and join the country as a whole. So we don't want to go down into so many analyses when it comes to this kind of communication because you might get into muddy waters very easily. But it's important to take a listen. And so, let's watch.
Ce n'est pas moi qui ai présenté Issa comme l'ami des terroristes. C'est Issa Tchiroma qui a déclaré que Chris Ano est mon meilleur ami. Pas un ami, mon meilleur ami. J'insiste là-dessus. Alors, si c'est son meilleur ami et qu'il sait tout ce que ce Christ Ano fait, on choisit ses amis, hein? On ne choisit pas ses frères, on ne choisit pas ses cousins, mais on choisit ses amis. Alors, s'il a choisi comme ami des terroristes, je souhaite que chaque Camerounais tire ses conclusions. Moi, j'ai estimé que un ami des terroristes, des gens qui prennent les armes contre les Camerounais, qui veulent tuer le Cameroun, je ne peux pas être ami avec eux.
And because he speaks slowly, we may have to cut and fast forward to the important part. Yes, it's a soundbite, but the full interview is on the Naya TV platform, and we're grateful that we are able to show you an excerpt like this, which speaks volume. And then, of course, on the part of Issa Tchiroma Bakary's 48-hour ultimatum, the minister has some very choice words to say.
Il a demandé 48 heures pour libérer les prisonniers
Mais il est
politiques.
qui pour donner 48 heures à un gouvernement en place? S'il veut mettre le feu au Cameroun, qu'il mette le feu, mais ce feu va le brûler, quel que soit l'endroit où il se trouve.
Vous n'avez pas peur de ce type de déclaration et de ce genre d'ultimatum?
Mais pourquoi avoir peur? Pourquoi avoir peur? Mais j'ai dit, s'il veut mettre le feu au Cameroun, ce feu va le brûler lui-même. Il va nous brûler tous, mais il va aussi aller le brûler là où il se trouve.
And in conclusion, Minister Grégoire Owona says if Issa Tchiroma Bakary wants to set the country ablaze, he should set it ablaze, set it on fire, but that the fire will burn everybody, but it will also burn Issa Tchiroma Bakary where he is. So it will burn us all and go and burn him. That was what the minister was saying. And then also hammering the fact that Issa Tchiroma Bakary is giving 48-hour ultimatum to who? Whereas he himself knows that, for over 1,000 people that have been arrested, according to their numbers, that it takes a long time for them to go through the process, And it's almost like a subtle message because, if you add it with the mission of Paul Atanganji, the Minister of Territorial Administration in the North, you would see that he had to go to the North to release the detainees that he called minors, and that he says they were manipulated, they were drugged, and so on, and that their parents pleaded. But he went to the North. There are detainees in the center. There are detainees in the littoral. All of them are saying that Issa Tchiroma Bakary's 48-hour ultimatum is nonsense. Now, bear with me for a second. Let's look at this a little bit closer. So, Issa Tchiroma Bakary issues an ultimatum on Sunday. 24 hours later, the Minister of Territorial Administration, Paul Atanganji, an architect in this whole process of post-electoral tension, finds himself in Yaoundé, and one of the first deliverables is the release of about 64 teenagers, minors, that were never supposed to have been arrested in the first place. And then he says that the head of state, has given instructions and directives that they should look into this matter, and that the parents came and begged, and that, they are the ones that were not implicated in anything, serious, and so on and so forth. But then, all they are trying to do is to show that Issa Tchiroma Bakary's ultimatum means nothing. But of all the places he could have released teenagers, people were arrested in the center region, in the littoral, in the west region, in the east. He left Yaoundé and flew all the way to Yaoundé to go and release detainees. In the north, which in our reading shows that they are trying to appease the north. And how was he doing it? He had to gather all the leaders, the leadership. So he called religious officials. He called traditional rulers. He has the men and women of the armed forces. He has those from the penitentiary. You see, everybody that is considered a leader, an opinion leader, a traditional leader, a religious leader, an administrative leader. So you see the pattern. So when you capture all of these people and bring them in a room, and you start to preach as he was doing, preaching to them, telling them about God, telling them about the presence of the head of state, the power of the head of state, and then distributing the speech of the head of state as if that speech has now become some form of, we'll call it legal tender or a legal document. It's not a legal instrument. The speech of the head of state is not a legal document. And you see why Cameroon struggles sometimes to express itself among the Committee of Nations. Because if the head of state has a directive, it either comes through a decree or an order or a law that is passed at the National Assembly. And all the ministers have portfolios, so they know exactly what to do. But to keep saying the head of state has said, le président a dit que, le chef de l'État a dit que, at some point you need to wonder that, are you a minister of your own or are you a puppet of le président a dit que? And that is not to denigrate the post of the minister. It's just to tell you that at some point, if governance becomes personality cult, then it explains why we are where we are today. So they are going about doing things that show they are trying to appease Issa Tchiroma Bakary, but yet acting like it doesn't matter because he left Yaoundé and went to Marwa and did the exact same thing, conducted the exact same exercise, gathered the elites, the important people, from different walks of life, and all those strategic people that need to go back in their community and then convince the youth, because they are worried about an uprising. Because remember, the Northwest and Southwest is not governable. The Ambazonian leadership has control in many parts. They've paralyzed the economy in so many ways, because the crisis has paralyzed the economy in so many ways, because the confrontation between the Ambazonian Defense Forces and all the other fractions that protect the territory versus the La République leadership and the military. And you've seen so many military officials have lost their lives. This is not a joke. Close to 2,000 men and women in uniform. And this is not a joke. And therefore, you can multiply that by at least 50 for those civilians that have lost their lives, because it seems like for every uniformed person, you need to multiply it by at least 20 or 30 or 40 civilians that must have died because of that. So the war in the Anglophone region, because we can call it a war because President Biya failed to use dialogue. He himself said the same Lord Reverend, and 9 years on, we've lost countless lives and people have been displaced internally and externally. So they're doing everything to protect the North, because they know that if there's an uprising in the North is not just North, which is Garwa. The North is also Far North, is also Adamawa. And those are 3 big regions. And if any uprising ensues in that part of the country, then there will be a breakaway, because the military cannot be deployed in the Southwest and Northwest region trying to quell tensions. And then the North is also doing its thing. And don't forget that in the Far North, there's Boko Haram. So at some point, if they are not careful, and don't also forget that the Adamawa is connected to the East very easily. So, and the East is struggling because they have a lot of issues in the East, and they have all the timber. They have a lot of mines and everything, and yet they don't have roads. They don't have hospitals. They don't have good schools. They don't have amenities. They don't even have good electricity. So many parts of the country can follow suit, and Yaoundé may be in big trouble, because the regime will just end up only controlling the center and part of the south, the center-south, and struggling to control the littoral and the west. And again, nothing says, these are regions that voted outrightly for the opposition for Issa Tchiroma Bakary. So again, administratively, they have no business with the ruling CPDM party. And that is why the rumors and the reports that we're getting that suggest that people are being arrested, those that stand out among the candidates that can actually win the municipal and legislative elections, there are reports that they are the ones that are being arrested now. It's this new wave that those in Yaoundé are trying to do some political, purging, so that when they go to the field, they will not have any form of competition. Because remember, the president may have been proclaimed the winner and even sworn in. But if there's some form of fast forward and this whole presidential election thing is put behind us, and then we move to the legislative and municipal elections, and the same scenario takes place where the opposition and the people that are championing change take over the reins of the assembly, President Paul Biya will not be able to govern. Because the only reason why the country is the way it is and the laws are the way they are is because they have a supermajority, and they've had supermajority since the return of multi-party politics in Cameroon. They used to pride themselves and say, oh, by the way, what they call it, parliamentary groups, the SDF used to have one as official opposition party. That was nothing. They could never pass a single bill, a single piece of legislation, never. The opposition in Cameroon has never passed a single piece of legislation in the entire history of the National Assembly. With 180 members, opposition has never passed a single private member's bill, a single private member's public, nothing, never. So again, we don't want to speculate, but there's so much evidence to show that there's some purging taking place. We already have MRC party members crying foul, as well as members of the FSNC party. As you know, all their leadership, majority, have been arrested, detained, and all those that support Issa Tchiroma Bakary, same thing. So there is a lot of evidence, and that's why when Issa Tchiroma Bakary was talking about ethnic cleansing and all those things, there are some strategic actions that the regime is deploying in order to maintain power. And that is even the case in the military. We have reports that there are so many people, different factions in the military, that have been denied access to arms. They've been given arms without bullets because the regime have their backs against the wall. We've told you that before. So they are deploying different tactics and putting in place a strategy to contain any form of insurrection. And they've even been doing so in the military. It's no longer a secret that the military is divided, and they are also using tribal divide and tribal tendencies to protect those that come from the south and the center region. And they are depriving those that come from the northern regions, the west regions, and even the Anglophone regions. They are depriving them of using firearms or even giving them arms that have bullets. They are trying to deprive their access. They are revoking access from so many people that work in the military at the level where they could be suspected of participating or supporting any form of insurrection, coup, and so on. And this tells you that despite the fact that they say President Paul Biya is a legal president, or they are claiming even legitimacy on top of that to say, well, if the people are sovereign and the people have elected him, then he has assumed office legally, so he's both legitimate and legal. So that's what surrogates of, so you have some lawyers who are CPDM members and they go on different platforms and start to explain these things. Even at that, they are panicking and they can't govern properly because the actions that they are taking cause to question the serenity that they are also proclaiming. And there you have it. So please continue to share in your circles and also leave a thumbs up if you like the content, and comment and leave your thoughts. You've heard so many things here. What piqued your interest? Go ahead, tell us. We'll love to hear, and we'll read all the comments when we have time, and we also try our best to stay on top of things to make sure that we don't miss important questions that we can use this opportunity to respond to. And of course, continue to subscribe because we're still on our Operation 10K. So we believe that we can do it. Together, we can do it. So continue to subscribe, and until the next one, stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay peaceful. Stay away from propaganda. May God bless Cameroon.